Welcome. This is Elvis, and this is the DADCast. I appreciate you for joining me. And before we get started, let's go ahead and address the elephant in the room. Dad, dating after divorce. And I know what you're thinking. Elvis is about to do a show about dating? No, not entirely. This is actually going to be one of the more serious conversations that I hope to start. And it's going to be a conversation that I plan to have with several different people throughout the course of the journey along this podcast. The primary topic that I want to talk about is co-parenting and actually finding that balance to co-parent when you have a situation where, clearly things didn't go as you intended. And moving forward, how do you co-parent and basically trust a person with one of the most important things of your life, which is your child? During this time, I've had a lot of conversations with, just some of my friends, and a few of the things that we discussed, first off, is men typically suffer in silence. What I mean by that is during difficult process and difficult times, what men typically like to do is we'll go to the people that we trust the most, our inner circle, and we'll have those conversations with them. But in order to not appear as if we're trying to lose our masculinity, what we do is we'll just keep the things quiet and put on a happy face and basically just try to grit our teeth and bear it. I'm going to be honest, throughout this journey, I plan to be extremely transparent, plan to be open on a lot of things, and I also intend to be fair. I realize that my story is my truth. There's always going to be another perspective based off of the people that are impacted and the people that I'm talking about. So in order to be fair, some of the things that I do want to do is make sure that I don't speak and say that a person thinks these things or this is what they mean by this. And I'm going to be completely honest. It's going to be challenging because a lot of the things that I plan to discuss are still raw, still in progress, and it's going to be hard to not take my interpretation of things and basically put a concrete perspective on someone else while I'm trying to interpret things based off of how they impact me. When I came up with the idea of the Dad podcast, it wasn't so much to just say, this is my journey into finding love again or finding somebody else after being divorced. It was more so talking to some of my close friends that have also been through the process of divorce or have had a situation where they have had a child with someone and they've moved forward through a challenging situation on not having aligned goals and not having aligned visions on how you want to raise that child. And you have equal rights to that child as much as your co-parent. So some of them are in different places. Some have situations where their co-parent has tried to alienate their children from them. Some have situations where their co-parent just basically don't allow them to speak with their children. Some have gotten past that situation. Things started out really rocky and really rough after the divorce or after the breakup, even in certain situations. And they've gotten to a place where things are peaceful and they are allowed to effectively co-parent. To be honest, that's somewhere that I hope to one day be. And through these discussions, I hope to find different tools and mechanisms that, I can hopefully put in place in my situation, so I can do what's best for my child. Because clearly, as the podcast states, I'm a dad. And I want to do what's best for raising my child. And I want to get to a healthy place as far as co-parenting. So, a little bit about my backstory. The reason for this, I grew up in a single parent home. I grew up with just my mom and my three younger brothers. One of the things that was challenging is I think about different periods in my childhood where I had a lot of male influences. We grew up primarily in a church. So there was a lot of different programs like the Royal Rangers and just different youth group things where you have older men that for whatever reason they see some type of qualities in you that they want to help cultivate. So I was fortunate in the sense that I did have male influence, but at the same time, there's never going to be a situation where you have a person that wants to pour into you the way that your father would. And I remember several times throughout my childhood that I struggled with the idea of I see some of my friends and, we're all at the same event and they have somebody that's cheering them on from the sideline. They have their dad in their life. And as much as I enjoy what we were doing, I enjoyed the activities, I did have that deep feeling of like something's missing. And I remember times that like, I haven't shared this with my mom or like, people that were outside of just like immediately being around me, that I just remember crying at times like, man, what is it about me that made my dad not be in my life? What made him not want me? And, not to have a Will Smith moment like, why don't you want me, man? But like, that's a real feeling. And that's something that I think that children go through. Like, one, I am partial and I believe that little boys, young men definitely need their dad. They need that role model. They need that positive influence. And I realize that all situations are not the same. Like, just because you have your dad in your life, I do acknowledge that might not just be the best person for you. Like, some people's dads are messed up. And like, as I grew up, that was my perspective. Like, I didn't really know my dad. I knew who he was. And when I got to high school, I got to a point where I got really close with the people on my dad's side of the family, namely my aunts, then a lot of my cousins. Like, we just got really close and really tight. But there was still that missing piece, and that was, like my relationship with my dad. When I got, I think it was around 17 or 18, I know it was before the military. Around that time, like, there was kind of like a introduction in the sense of like, my dad would pop up in different times in life and like, just show up for a day, say hi, and then he's gone. But there was a period that he had like a lawnmower grass cutting business. And I remember him coming around because, he was cutting a lot of the grass in the neighborhood that I lived in. And he basically came and cut our grass. And I remember having a conversation with him. And in that conversation, I basically just asked him, because like at this point, I'm about to go to the military. I'm grown in my mind. And I asked him, I was like, why weren't you around when I was a kid? Like, it wasn't an introduction to the conversation. It wasn't a lead up. It wasn't any like, this is where the conversation is going, so let me ask him. It was just like, yo, you knocked on the door. You're about to cut the grass. You're sitting down right here, drinking some water. So just tell me straight up, why weren't you around? And his answer at the time was not sufficient. But at the same time, like, now that I'm a little bit older, like, I can't necessarily say that this wasn't his truth. But his response was, your mom didn't want me around. And I remember when he said that. I remember, like, being a young man and, like, hearing your mom didn't want me around. And in my mind, I was like, man, that's the weakest. Like, you mean to tell me that we're your children? Like, me and my brother, same mom, same dad. I have your name. Like, you're Elvis. I'm Elvis. And you mean to tell me that my mom didn't want you around, so I didn't see you until like, what, 17 or 18? Like, you consistently were inconsistent and popping up once every 5 to 6 years, and there was nothing. But, that was what his answer was. And it was never anything that I was like okay with. It was not anything that I put a lot of thought into. But now that I'm like older and now that I'm a dad, I have a different perspective on that. And this is the part of the conversation that I plan to be extremely raw. Throughout the process of my divorce, I filed because there were a lot of things that, like, I just knew that we had challenges as far as our relationship. And when my son was born, the challenges from the relationship it wasn't anything I was expecting, him to get, like, him being here, that they would get better. But I was under the impression that, like, we would lean into each other because we now have, like, a greater purpose. We now have a larger reason to make things work between us. And so he was born, And like, just to be entirely transparent, there were a lot of boundaries that we didn't necessarily set, but I made the mistake of thinking that some things were unspoken, like, just having unspoken boundaries. And that's one of the reasons why relationships themselves are challenging, is because, like, both parties go into a relationship with an entirely different person, expecting the other person to understand what's on their mind, expecting the other person to have values that you hold dear. And then sometimes, even when you express those values and those expectations, you expect the other person to just adopt them because of how important they are to you. But I say all that to say that, like, when my son was born, there were a lot of things that I was expecting, and a lot of things that I just felt like I was being let down on. And the role that I wanted to have initially in my son's life, I just wanted to bond with him from the moment that he was born. And I wanted it to be a bonding between myself, his mother, and him, the three of us. That was the unit that I expected. But unfortunately, that wasn't something that we shared that same vision. And I'm not saying that I was right, she was wrong, but at the same time, like, her unit of support involved her mother as well. And I don't have any issues with that, but the way that it was executed was in a way that, like, okay. And here's the part that, like, once again, I'm promising that I'm not trying to interpret someone else's actions and say this is what they were thinking. But the actions themselves led me to believe that the mother was being leaned on more than I was. And I didn't agree to that, nor did I welcome that. So it was like, just a situation that, decisions were being made and I wasn't, like, a part of those decisions. And it involved my son. So that caused a lot of early friction. And part of like the moving on beyond that is from the moment he was born and those decisions and those, like, I guess that foundation being set, it kind of created like a turbulent, like, perspective for me in regards to that. So, like, I wasn't okay with it. But that was also a foundation. So as my son got a little bit older throughout the first few months of his life, I realized that we already kind of went into parenthood, like, from the moment he was born, we weren't seeing eye to eye. So, like, it was already like a friction period between us. So I understand that, her role and her mother, they have that unit, that cohesion that you kind of want some type of stability, especially when you go through something like a change as big as, like, bringing a child into the world. So, like, if me and her aren't seeing eye to eye, I do understand her wanting to have that balance of having that relationship with her mother, and, like, that's fine. But then at the same time, like, that didn't necessarily, like, come in a full circle where the bond was worked on between me and her. And I can't say that I'm 100% I can't say that I was 100% like working on trying to make things right between her, because like I said, there was a lot of things that happened, throughout pregnancy, throughout, like, him being born, that it just was really challenging to just, like, say, all right, let's put all that aside and move in a direction that is just me and you, and we got to make this work. Those conversations were had, but at the same time, like, we had a lot of different things that kind of splintered our relationship, that it was hard to hear from me to say that, I want to move in this direction now, and that was a direction that we as a family was going to go. Like, I did not have that place where, like, and once again, this is my feelings. I didn't feel that I had that place that if I wanted to establish a new direction for our family, that she would go along with me. So it was what it was. But Fast forward a little bit, like my son was, a few months old, and then I just saw the direction that things were going, just as far as me and his mother, and her leaning more into her relationship with her mother, just as far as the parenting of my child. I've always been present. I've always been active in my son's life, and like I hate that I'm saying that because like some things go without saying. The moment my son was born, based off of just who he was, like I was the first person to hold him. And, while his mother was in recovery, like me and him just sat alone in a room staring at each other, trying to figure out what we're going to do with each other. I'm looking at him in my hands like, what am I going to do with you? Like, wow, everything just changed. He's looking up at me like, yo, what I'm going to do with you? Like, he's blinking. Everything's changed for him as well. And so we had that moment. And from then, like, it was just a lot of thoughts. Like it was pride, joy, fear, anxiety, because like, I started to think about just like me growing up without a dad. And I knew that was something that as long as I could help it, that was going to be an impossibility for him. He was never going to have a situation where like I just wasn't going to be around. And we never were going to have a situation that I would just choose to not be in his life, regardless on like the situation of anything that tried to take me away from him. So those were the thoughts that I was having. And like, just that fast forward to the point that, we moved from Virginia back to Kansas City to be closer to family. And I was under the impression that like, this is something that she wanted more than me. Like I was fine with living in Virginia. I actually had the idea of like staying in Virginia for the first 2 years of his life, just so we could work on a foundation between us as a family. So I would depend on you, you would depend on me, and we know that we're in this together as far as raising our child. But she wanted to be back here closer to family, and I agreed to it because I wanted to like show that I'm in this. I'm like, all right, if this is something that you think will help make you happier, as far as we're in this marriage together, okay, fine. I don't feel ready to move back to Kansas City, but I'm willing to do it because this is a decision that I'm taking myself out of the picture and putting family first. We moved back to Kansas City, and we are living about 5 minutes from her mother's house, which initially was fine because, her mother, this is her first grandchild, and she wanted to be as active as possible in her grandchild's life. I was totally in support of that because I know my relationship with my grandmother. And like at times, like, sometimes I would look at my role and my grandmother's role in our relationship. And I thought that was something that was like, at times I valued that more than my relationship with my mom. Not a shot at my mom, but like, I just love my grandmother that much. And I knew that if my son felt the way for his grandmother the way I felt for mine, then like, that would be something that I would be happy and proud of. So living that close to her wasn't an issue, but as stated before, we didn't have a situation where like we shared the same views of boundaries. And so initially, like, her mother came over a lot, which, like I said, I was okay with, I was fine with because, they're bonding as well. But then there was like a shift where it felt to me as if, initially, my child's mother, she went back to work and she was working outside of the house. I was teleworking because I still had my job in Virginia. So during the first few months of his life, kids, brand new infants and stuff, they sleep a lot. So it was easy to basically telework and still, when my son's awake, feed him, change him, then he'll go back to sleep for hours. That was fine. Then, like, there was a shift in me being able to spend that time with them while I was working, and her mother was basically coming over every day. And at first I was like, okay, that's fine. when her mother's here, I'll just focus on, doing my work. And then when I have a time that, either her mother has to focus on her work, I'll put my computer down, spend it, being a parent. And it worked out well. The problem then became that we still, like we being myself and my child's mother, we still weren't on the same page. And we never got to a point where we actually like worked on our underlying issues and tried to find out what was broken between us to actually address it. We had a lot of periods during our relationship where if we weren't arguing, that was the best I could ask for. And, we functioned more in a period of not arguing than we functioned as like, a happy couple that like, I actually could see myself wanting to be with this person. This person makes me happy, makes me complete, makes me full. It was more so like, from my perspective, it's like, okay, I can't address this, and this because these things are triggers. I can't talk about what I want to do as a family in these areas because, clearly she has her perspective and, she doesn't want to join me along this journey. So it was kind of like a lot of things that was chipping away at what my expectation was and even wanting to get married. Like I said before, in relationships, you go into them with what your perfect picture is. And I did the same. Like I got married with the idea of like, this is what I want to be as a husband. This is what I want to do for my family. This is the direction that I want to take my family. And we actually got married like super fast. Like we reconnected. And that's a step back that I'll take a little bit later. But we actually dated when we were in our late 20s. We dated for about 3 to 4 years, then we broke up and actually didn't speak for over 10 years. During that time, we both went on, lived our lives, dated other people, and relationships ended with the other people that we were with, and we reconnected. And from the moment that we reconnected, we literally decided that within a month that let's just get married. And I went into marriage under the impression that like this is a person. I've dated people since me and her broke up, and I don't know that I gave our relationship previous to that 10-year hiatus and moving on with life. I don't know if I gave our relationship everything that I possibly could have to make it work. So from the moment that we reconnected, realized that there's still some type of feelings there, we basically got married a month later, which was not, in hindsight, it wasn't the wisest decision for either one of us. Both of us had very strong personalities, and we didn't even address a lot of the issues. Like we talked about while we broke up before, got over that, but never did we talk about what a relationship looks like going forward. Never did we talk about what our expectations were for each other, what our expectations were for ourselves in a relationship with each other, and if that was something that we could like actually agree to. We're just like, yo, if we're going to be back in each other's lives, I understand that I still have feelings, you have feelings, and there's not really going to be like I'm just dating to get to know you again, because like we kind of already know each other. Like the end result will have to be marriage. So like in the event that we get back to each other's lives and actually start moving in a direction that we want to like be a part of each other's life, the end result would have to be marriage. And I was under the impression that like, okay, as long as we're on that page, we'll work towards that. She wanted to get married a lot faster than I did, and I went into it asking myself, like, what's the worst that could happen? Yeah, that was... I honestly went into it thinking, like, I get along with people, and I felt like I was flexible enough in any situation that if we had issues, that we would be able to work through them. But we also haven't established what working through things looked like because we hadn't been in each other's lives long enough. That first month from when we reconnected to like when we actually got married, that's the honeymoon stage. The you're in my life and you're a new person, so yeah, we can get along. And like, the issues that might have came up in that first month, since I'm more excited about you being in my life, those are things that I'll brush under the table. And those are minor things. Once we did get married, it was still kind of a wild period because I was living in Virginia and she was living in Kansas. So like, it was a lot of traveling back and forth, at least from November when we got married until February when she actually moved up to Virginia. So like probably like every 2 or 3 weeks I would fly there or she would fly there to Virginia. And it was fine. We had periods of interaction, and we started to like identify things about ourselves, and it was like we still had enough distance and space that when we did come together, and if there was an issue, we were able to deal with that because we knew we only had a limited number of days before one of us flew back home. So that was able to get through that. But when she moved out to Virginia, and we didn't have that whole expectation like this visit is only a few days. It was like, all right, we're in this now. We didn't have an established way of actually dealing with our issues with each other. So like we would have an issue, fight it out, but then that issue is still there because the person's still there. It's like she's not going away for a few weeks and then I'll see her in a couple of weeks, so let's get over this. It was like she's going to be here. And the same with me, like there's things that like I've done that were like, pet peeves and triggers of hers, and, that he's still here like every day. And so we never really had a good way of working through those things. And that basically just left us in a place where like this is like a lot harder than I expected it to be. So I say all that to fast forward back when my son was here. After a few months of his life, having that foundation of like not really understanding how to deal with problems, and now we have a whole nother person and we have different philosophies and different expectations as far as how we want to raise him, different philosophies as far as the boundaries for each other and our family outside of like our core 3-person unit. It just got a lot harder that neither one of us were willing to hear each other. So eventually we get to the point that I file for divorce and she moves out. When she moves out, that was the challenging part because when she moved out, we had a parenting plan that we had established by a mediator, and they leaned more into like her role as a mother, which is fine. My son was I think like 6 or 7 months at the time. So they lean more into her role as a mother because he's still an infant. So it was a plan that basically for every hour that I had him, she had him 2 hours, and then she had him pretty much like every night of the like. So it was like 2 nights he stayed with her, then 1 night he got to stay with me. 2 nights he stayed with her, 1 night he stayed with me. But then on the weekend, it was something that was totally convoluted beyond that superseded the 2-1-2-1 thing. And it was like, okay, on the weekends that he'll come with dad, dad will have him for 12 hours and then mom will see him for 4 hours and then he'll come and stay the night with dad. And on the weekends that he's with mom will have him for like 20 hours. He'll spend 4 hours with dad and then dad sees him again once we go back to like, I know that sounds confusing because that's exactly how it was. And so initially during the time that, just to jump back, when she was out of the house working and we had the situation where, her mom was coming over, While we were in mediation, I find out that her mother wasn't coming over solely to bond with our child. Her mother was coming over primarily as a spy to make sure that she had someone watching our son that she felt comfortable with. Mind you, I'm his dad. I've been there every moment of his life. And there's a secret agenda between her and her mom that, like, I will keep my eyes on your child while you're at work so you know that he's in good hands. So, like, I was already, once again, this is my interpretation. But based off of me hearing that, it was that I was already being painted as, like, not being suitable as a dad and not having any say in whatever that role was. And I understand, that's her mom, so her mom is going to look out for her or whatever. But at the same time, I was like, we were married. Like, you're inviting external people into the dealings of our marriage, and, like, what was the point of us getting married if, like, the conversations are not going to be had with me? But once again, I say all that to say that we had a foundation that just wasn't, like, built on me and her actually leaning on each other. So it was already bad before the things that got worse presented themselves. So that was that. But to go back to when I filed, we had this convoluted parenting plan that made things super challenging, and my initial proposal when I filed was like, hey, you are his mother, I'm his dad, we both care about him more than anything, we both have a right to our child. So the fair thing is if we were to have just a situation where we're both available all the time to him. But since we weren't going to be living together, I was like, okay, let's do a 50-50 joint custody where, like, we'll have a 2-2-3 schedule. 2 days he's with me, 2 days he's with you, then 3 days for the weekend he's with me. Next weekend, 2 days he's with you, 2 days he's with me, then 3 days he's with you. So there's the 50-50 joint custody. And that's what I asked for when I filed, because I was like, that makes sense. Like, not only do we both have a relationship with him, more importantly, he has a relationship with us. Yeah, this was my suggestion. The response was through her lawyer that her request was 90% custody to my 10%, meaning that I only got to spend time with him while she's at work, and then every other weekend he would come and stay with me from Friday to Saturday night, because she wanted him Sunday through 2 weeks into the future, that Friday again. And those were the only times that he would be able to stay with me. And, like, when I saw that from her lawyer, I was like, I don't know if y'all expect me to agree with this. I don't know where the disconnect is as far as, like, joint custody, 50-50, to you think I'm only going to be able to, like, see my son every other weekend. Like, this is a person that I, like, aside from, like, at the time, work trips, or I think I had, like, one weekend trip where I went away with my friends. But you think I'm just gonna, like, sit back and be like, okay, yeah, I'm going to allow a situation where I'm not actively in my child's life and give that up to a situation that you've already established before, like, the divorce was final, where, your mother now has the role in my child's life that I should have. Like, no, I'm not going for that. So the entire time that we were going through the divorce process, that was my suffer in silence part, where every day that we were going through this custody where she had him 2 hours to my 1 hour, and then I'm getting all these papers and stuff back and forth from her lawyer, where it basically was lies that they were writing out to make it seem like I was unfit as a dad, that I wasn't in his life. I think on one paper I saw something that said that I have not actively been in his life. And so like that was something that, like going back and forth with my lawyer, it was just stressful knowing that the intent was to take my child out of my life. And then like it finally like came back to me, like the conversation I had with my dad when I was 17, when I asked him, like, why weren't you in my life? And he said, your mom didn't want me around. That whole full circle moment finally started to make sense that that could actually be a real life situation. That also was something that energized me, and it was like, look, man, I know this is a very rough time. Like, these are my internal conversations. Like, every time I get a response from the lawyer, it's always them asking me to like sign away my parental rights or accept that like he's going to primarily be with her. We went through mediation, and the mediator was like, hey, it's not going to be an easy chance for you to get 50-50 custody of your child. And I was like, I don't understand what y'all think this is. Like, what kind of situation? Like, why is the preference and why is the expectation that like just because a person is a mom that they're automatically, and this is not a shot at her, but like it seemed like the expectations through the court system was that because a person is a mom, they're automatically more qualified to be a parent and a better parent than the dad. Like from the moment that my son was born, everything in my life became a sacrifice for how to make his life better. And unfortunately, we had a situation that we just didn't see eye to eye, and we both had different values and had different expectations on how we wanted to raise him. But at the same time, it was a challenge because I was like, we're in a situation that these people were trying to tell me that I'm not going to have equal access to my child. Now, mind you, we're going through this whole divorce process, and I understand the challenge of going through a divorce. I understand how hard it is. And basically, while you're going through that, it feels like a war, and the person that you were just married to is now your enemy. So looking back at that time, like I still have a lot of things that I'm processing through with my therapist to like deal with. But to know that there was a situation where, she knew she had him more than I did. And not once throughout the divorce process did she reach out to me and ask, hey, do you want to spend more time with our child? Like, that's something that I had to deal with. And then, to fast forward and not to going through all the intricate details of it, when we finally went to court, the judge ruled basically everything that I asked for in my divorce proposal is exactly what we got. The only problem now is, I just spent a whole lot of money on lawyers to get exactly what I asked for. She spent a whole lot of, I don't know how much she spent, but if she spent anywhere close to what I spent, she probably would have spent a whole lot of money on lawyers to get absolutely nothing that she asked for. So when the divorce was final, we had 50-50 custody of our child, where we had the 2-2-3. 2 days he's with her, 2 days he's with me, 3 days for the weekend he's with her. Next weekend, 2 days he's with me, 2 days he's with her, 3 days he's with me for the weekend, and we just continue to rotate. And even once that was established, like we're now at a situation that I'm like, we just had this 5 to 6 month period where like I did not get to be the dad to my child as far as physical availability that I always imagined when I became a dad. And moving forward, like, we're still in a situation that we don't speak at all. Like outside of like custody exchanges, like where, I have to give him to her, she has to give him to me. We don't even speak to each other then. It's like, all right, son, I love you. I'll see you in a few days. We're speaking directly to our son. So like we still have that challenging thing that like through this journey, not just a podcast, I plan to hopefully grow and develop different coping mechanisms on that to be a better co-parent. Like I desire to be a better co-parent, and I hope time is what is necessary in order to get a situation where we both desire to be better co-parents. But I say all that to say that's what is the idea behind what led me to this point, to wanting to do this. So the podcast is going to be myself having different conversations, and it might evolve to like me no longer even being in the picture. But these conversations are important and they need to be had because I have a lot of friends that are currently going through situations similar. They're going through situations where the mother is not just like trying to keep them out of their kid's life, but they're actually like alienating the dad from their child. We have situations where some of my friends have been through divorces, and the divorce initially was a very challenging time. Parents seemed like they were enemies, and here we are years later, and they're actually going to things with each other and like co-parenting effectively. So, I'm sorry, I have to get some water. So that's my goal. I want to have these conversations, and each week I want to have these conversations, and each episode I plan to have a conversation with a different person, and this person will talk about where they are in their journey, how they're parenting, how they're co-parenting, and also they're just going to talk about the things that have worked for them to hopefully offer some tools for myself and offer tools for people out there that might just be viewers and going through similar situations and currently suffering in silence, wanting a better co-parenting relationship because you want to be the person you can be and dream to be for your child. And also, I don't want it to be a situation where the podcast is focused on the appearance of beating up on the person that doesn't have a voice on the podcast. So this is episode 1 of the Dad podcast. I know it's a lot deeper than you typically see me in my internet persona. But like I said, this is a conversation that needs to be had. So this was a very personal episode, a lot of information that never really thought I would say on camera. But this is episode 1. And as we move forward in this journey, I plan on having these discussions with a lot of other people, and it's going to be a lot of transparency. So appreciate you for like giving me your time and checking us out. And hopefully we'll be able to grow a lot from this. The D.A.D. podcast.